Hey, Shawn, thanks so much for being here today.
Hi, Kate. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Well, I'm excited to share with listeners today about your upcoming 6-month memoir class that you're offering with your wife, Miley. And before we talk about that, I'd love just to hear some more about your experience writing memoir as an author. And also, I know that you often collaborate with other writers to help them share their stories and write their memoirs as well. So I would love to hear from you, first of all, what is something that you enjoy most about writing memoir?
Oh, well, I mean, so I have one memoir of my own, Once We Were Strangers, and I think there's something so powerful about the thing with memoir is it's not this sweeping autobiography from when you were born to when to the end of your life. It's like um you take a certain theme and a really powerful moment in your life or a powerful series of moments, and then that becomes the memoir. So it's a slice of someone's life that meant a lot to them, that means a lot to them, and I think you can get so much out of those kinds of stories. And then with the ones that I collaborated on, um you know uh, so a lot of what I do is with older people who they've had successful businesses, or they just want to share their story with with their family members or other people in their lives. And the cool thing is, like, when they finally sit down and write this stuff down, they tell stories that other people never heard before. Like their kids will read the books and get in touch with me and be like, I never knew that happened, or I never knew that about my parent. And so I think when we take a moment to write out, with a memoir, a section of our life, and we tell that story and we tell the truth that we learned through our experience, it's just such a powerful way to communicate, the events that have happened in our lives, the things that have happened to us, and then the truths that we've learned, and I think that's really beautiful when we can pass on these things that we've learned to other people.
Yeah, that is so true. And I have one published memoir, A Place to Land, and my kids obviously have read it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, there are some things in there that they don't know about my life, but now they will. So as you
Yes.
said, there's things that just come out in the telling. But I really appreciated how you broke down sort of the difference between an autobiography and a memoir, because a lot of people come to me and they say, I want to write my story. And I say, that's so great. I encourage them and I'm thrilled to hear that. But I think sometimes there's a little bit of a confusion or disconnect between what is memoir and what
Mm,
is autobiographical, more like I was born in this year and this date.
yes.
Whereas with memoir, like you said, it's more of like a specific slice or segment. You're not really sharing your entire life, but a particular angle as well,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah.
So
I mean, oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, so someone might come into the course sort of envisioning writing really their autobiography, and that's okay to start that way.
Mhm.
But I think that once you really get into the practice and you really start to focus in on doing the writing, what you realize is that if you tell these stories well, you don't have the space to write a life story, right? Like you're talking about probably 1,000-page autobiography if you really write it well and you dig into the stories. Whereas with a memoir, the length of it, you have the opportunity to really dig deep into certain aspects of your life. And that's just one of the things that's so cool about memoir.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the fact that because it typically is focused on a particular topic or an angle of your life, that you could potentially write more than one, and you don't have to wait until the end of your life to be able to write memoir, which is
Yes.
really fun too. I several times when I was in the book writing process and I told people I was writing memoir, they said, "But you're so young. How do you have any, like, how can you write a memoir now?" But I think once you understand that it's really just focusing in, like narrow, almost zooming in on a particular aspect and telling the true story about that part of your life, um, is where it really becomes meaningful as well, instead of dragging on and on as
Yes.
well. Yeah.
Yes.
What has been some of the most challenging parts for you of both with writing your own memoir and helping other people write theirs?
I think once we start down the road of writing about our lives, we will often encounter really difficult truths. And I think, sometimes people jump into this process and they think, oh, it's going to be really hard to write about what so and so did, or it's going to be really hard to write about this other thing. But if you come into a memoir and you're willing to be truthful, if you're willing to write the truth, and not necessarily, I'm not talking about the facts, but I'm talking about the trueness of what you've experienced, that can be really difficult.
Mhm.
It can be difficult to come face to face with our own shortcomings.
Mhm.
Um, when I was writing my memoir, Once We Were Strangers, it was about a friendship that I had with a Syrian refugee. And what I realized as I'm writing this memoir is that, wow, I'm not a really good friend. Like, I don't feel like I practice um, friendship very well. And I was learning this from Muhammad, as we became closer and I saw how he interacted with life and the people around him. And I started to realize, wow, I started to wonder, do I have deep friendships? Um, do I have the ability to invest in others without being selfish or without sort of putting up this hedge that keeps other people out? And so I think that when you start down the road of writing a memoir, it's important that you're willing to confront some of those things, like some of these things about ourselves that are a little bit difficult to take in. And I think the other thing is, like, sometimes people will go into writing a memoir, a book about themselves, and you can tell they really have a bone to pick with someone. Like, there was someone in their past who hurt them or did them wrong. And I think you really have to caution yourself against that being one of the main reasons that you're writing a book, is sort of to expose what someone did to you, or to throw someone under the bus. And there are things that happen that should legitimately come to light. There are things that are done to us as individuals that deserve to be told. I'm not saying that's not part of writing a memoir, but I think that can't be at the heart of the reason that you're writing. If that's at the heart of the reason, if it's like a revenge, like a revenge flick, um, I'm not sure that you're going to be able to experience all that this process has to offer, especially the part that I mentioned before about really embarking on this journey of self-discovery. Because if you're so focused on how you were poorly treated,
Mhm.
then you're never going to be able to see the truth about yourself.
Yes, that is so key. I'm so glad you brought that up. And I think that leads me to another question just related to the timing of when it's appropriate to write, but also then to publish, because we both
Mm,
know that writing is one thing and publishing is completely
yeah,
different.
yeah.
And, there's a talk that I've given at a couple of different writers' conferences on memoir and telling your story, where I include a section about when is the right time. It's such a common question that I get asked by people who want to tell their story. Either they're still in the midst of a really hard time and they don't know if they're ready, or like you said, there are people, it's true life, so this is complicated, and we have relationships that are not always perfect or rarely perfect, and often stories will involve other people and they want to know, do I write it now when those people are alive, and what if I hurt them and they've hurt me. And one thing that I often say is, number one, do not write from a place of hostility or bitterness.
Yeah.
And you can write, but don't publish that. You
Yes.
can write it and
Yes.
get it out.
Yes.
Write it out for yourself, get it
Yeah.
out, but be very careful to publish anything
Mm,
that you are writing out of a place of bitterness, like you said, revenge, where you have been hurt. You need to wait to publish until you have worked through that forgiveness process and, really searched your own heart for that hostility, because the other reality is that will reflect very quickly for the reader as well. And that's not pleasant. You don't want to have a false sense of everything being rosy by any means, but if you're kind of writing from a dark place, that's going to reflect to the reader very quickly, and I think be quite off-putting, to be honest.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point, I think, with that distinction between the timing to write and the timing to publish. I don't know that there's ever really a bad time to write our stories. I
Right.
think, you can write it right when you're in the middle of it, and it might just be like howling on the page, and that's totally fine for you to do that. But yes, it's true. Like when it comes to actually putting your story together, assembling it, and then distributing it for other people to read, it can be really difficult to read something when it's just written out of bitterness or written out of anger.
Mhm.
And I think part of the reason for that is because as a reader, you're not getting a glimpse of the person who's writing the memoir. You're just getting a glimpse of the person who they're angry at, right? So the story ends up not even being about the person who's writing the memoir. The story ends up being about this other person. And that is not what the reader wants. The reader, and that's I feel like, well, and when I collaborate, I say this, like, this is the way to approach this: is this is your story. This is a story about you. So you can write about these hard things, and you can write about these people who really hurt you, or you can write about these people who really helped you and loved you and brought you through this. But you need to tell it from your perspective, and you need to tell it in a way where you are, where your experience is really at the center. So you can talk about your pain, you can talk about your hurt, you can talk about what the other person did. But I think, if you stray further and further from yourself and the story becomes about other people, you're right. Like that's when it becomes a difficult process for the reader.
Sure. And the other people can't necessarily argue with how you experience something. They
Mhm.
might have a different version of how that thing happened, but how you experienced it is that belongs to you, right? And says the writer.
Yeah,
So it's yours
yeah,
to tell. Yeah.
and that can become, that process can actually become a really beautiful part of writing a memoir too, if the relationship is right to share your work with that person. I've collaborated on projects where, um, the person wrote really, really difficult things that happened to them, and then was able to share it with that parent, or share it with that sibling, or share it with that individual who was sort of part of the pain. But their relationship has changed in intervening years, and the writing and the sharing of that memoir becomes this really beautiful part of the healing process. And so that's another thing that can come out of this. And it's not that you have to do that. It's not that, you know, um, that I even necessarily recommend that in all circumstances. But if you are in a place where you can write this story and then share it with the people who are involved in it,
Mhm.
also, I mean, just for like litigation and legal purposes, to be able to have other people sign off on it, to read it and say, yes, this is okay, you can tell these stories. When it comes to the publishing piece, that can be really important too.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I want to go back to what you're saying about it being healing, because I think from what you were saying before about being willing to be honest with yourself and really go deep into your experience and not just sort of gloss over at a surface level can be very healing for the writer. And when you take the time to do that work, if you do it well, it can also become healing for a reader who's had a similar experience, which I think is such a gift as authors, isn't it? When we hear from readers that something that we wrote that we didn't know would help them ends up helping them, I think is such a blessing and it's so rewarding to have that experience when you kind of have the double benefit of having healing within yourself, but also being able to help others through telling the story.
Yeah, there's a really beautiful, it's like this ripple effect, right? Like you have the huge impact for yourself of writing this story and of telling the things that you learned or what you experienced. But then, like you said, it moves out from there.
Mhm.
Should you decide to publish, I mean, there are a lot of people who write their stories and feel like, wow, I need to get this down for me. And maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I'll share it with someone. But for now, I just want to get it written. And that's totally fine. Like it can be a beautiful healing experience for yourself. But then when the publishing process happens and other people read it and they reach out to you and say, wow, this was so helpful for me, that's just an incredibly rewarding part of writing memoir.
That's true. Yeah, that was one unexpected benefit that I had in writing my memoir. I included the story of my mom's death. It was kind of a large
Mm,
feature. And it only published, I guess, 7 years after she died. So it wasn't quick, it was a good seven
yeah.
years after. But that I remember so the book came out in April, and that first Mother's Day after it released, and I was still sad, but it was a different kind of grief on that first Mother's Day. And I thought, what is different this year from the past 7 Mother's Days without my mom? And I think for me, one thing that I didn't realize would happen was it did help to sort of soften the grief a little bit, or take that edge off,
Mm,
just knowing
yeah.
that the story had been captured, that it
Yeah.
was there, and I didn't have to risk forgetting it anymore because it was down on paper and I could
Mm,
hold it in my hands. And if some of those details then were forgotten later, it was okay because I could go back,
yeah.
and even for my kids
Yeah.
too. So things like that can be unexpected benefits in writing one story.
Yeah. And that whole idea of having this physical thing that you've created that you can now give to children, to relatives, to a spouse, to friends. It's really hard to describe to someone who's never written a book how that can feel, but it is such an incredible experience. Because really what we're saying with memoir is, this is me, like this is a piece of me.
Mhm.
And as people read it and as they come back to you and just say, wow, this was really touching, or this was really good, I really enjoyed these stories, it starts to validate um, our experience, and in some ways it can even um, take these difficult, painful things that we've been through and bring life to them, and help us process and help us to see, oh wow, there's good coming out of this really painful part of my life.
Yes, no, for sure. And I should have mentioned your memoir in my introduction, so I apologize for that. But I want to encourage anyone who's watching and listening to get a copy of Once We Were Strangers. And the subtitle is What Friendship with a Syrian Refugee Taught Me About Loving My Neighbor. I know you referenced it, Shawn, when you were talking, but I just wanted to say we listened to it as a family on a road trip a couple of years ago, and it was so well done. It was so nice to even hear you reading it. So that was a great
Yeah.
benefit of it. But just what you shared about realizing about yourself, about feeling like you weren't a great friend. I just want to say from that book, I think your willingness to ask yourself those questions and to work through that on your own has really brought out a message to challenge others to ask those questions of themselves. And
Mm,
so I want to thank you for that, but also to encourage those who are thinking about writing their memoir, you know, the questions that we're willing to ask ourselves might lead others to also take action of meaningful change in their own lives. And so it can be very hard. I mean, I spent many nights crying in Starbucks over my laptop, trying to work through some of those things to write. But, in the end, I think we can both testify that it's definitely worth it.
yes, yeah, it is, and that was an experience for me that I met Muhammad in around 2016, and the book probably covers about a year, maybe, of our friendship, a year and a half. So it wasn't like a huge slice of my life. It wasn't, time wise. And again, like as we said at the beginning, that is the really beautiful thing about memoir, is that any experience, any truth that you've learned, anything that you've been through, it all makes really wonderful content when it comes to creating a memoir. So it doesn't have to be like this huge experience that, stretched out over 10 years or 20 years of your life. It can really be a small slice.
Yeah, no, that's really encouraging for those who, I think a lot of people also think, oh, my life has been so boring, or there's nothing significant, nothing earth shattering that happened. But you really can take the ordinary and turn it into
Mm,
something meaningful that
yes.
can help you and help other people. So
Yes.
great. So tell me a little bit more about the 6-month memoir course that you're going to be offering. I know it starts October 10th and goes into April of next year. For those listening, registration will be opening on September 10th. So I will share the link where you can join. But Shawn, tell us, for those who are interested and would like to participate, what will the course look like? What will you be offering, and what might they expect from it?
Yeah, so it'll be over 6 months. We'll take the first couple of weeks to sort of just break into the idea as writers begin to find their voice and think more about the topic and the scenes that they would write. So that's sort of the beginning. We'll have a few books that we'll recommend, but not too many. What I really want to focus in on are 1 or 2 books about writing memoir, and then we'll choose one memoir. I haven't actually chosen it yet, but we'll choose one memoir to read together, just to get a feel for what a well-written memoir looks like, to give us ideas for scenes, chapters, that sort of thing. There'll be a weekly video that I'll produce, and it comes out every week on each of the weekly topics. And we have 1 to 2 Zoom calls scheduled per month. So it's a little lighter over the holidays. We'll probably just do 1 Zoom call a month in November and December, but the other months we've got 2 Zoom calls. And that's when we just come together as a group. Everybody in the class is invited, and we catch up about how our work is going. We ask questions of each other of, how are you doing this? Or what should I do? I'm in this situation. We have a class called the 9-month novel, and these Zoom calls, we actually started doing them monthly, and they were so valuable and people loved them so much that we went to twice a month, because everyone loves catching up. Everyone loves like hearing how everyone else's writing is going. So those Zoom calls are really, really fun. We have like target word counts starting in November. So the course starts in October. Starting November, we have sort of rough target word counts to see if everyone can stay on track to writing a 40 to 50,000 word memoir over the course of the 6 months. And then as we get to the end, we'll start to talk with, a couple industry experts. We'll talk with some folks who have self-published. We'll just kind of map out the various options that you have once you have a completed manuscript. We'll talk about revision, beta readers, all that sort of thing. So our goal is to hold your hand and walk you through the writing of your memoir. So, here's how many words you need to write this week. Here's a topic that maybe you're thinking about at this part of writing your memoir that would be helpful for you to think about. Here's what a story structure should look like. All these things are included in the course. And I don't want to forget anything, but we do have a syllabus that you can check out that is attached to the link. Once you send that out, Kate, they'll be able to scroll down, see what's included in the course. And then there's a link to the syllabus where you can check out all the topics that we'll be talking about, the books we'll be reading, and those sorts of things. But Miley and I, one of our great joys is helping other people to write their books. We're about 7 months into our 9-month novel course, and it is so much fun to see. Some people raced ahead and they're finishing. Some people, the light is just coming on and they realize, wow, I'm getting close to the ending. I can't believe this. I'm actually going to finish this novel. And that is just such a wonderful thing to see, that people have entered into something that feels like a marathon. It feels like, I don't know how to ever get this done. I don't know how I can fit this into my life. But we've somehow managed to work together, to get on this journey together, and now they're finishing their book, and it is such a cool thing to see.
Oh, that's amazing. I wish you guys had been doing this when I was writing my memoir. Maybe I need to write another one. It sounds like
yes, you do. You do need to write another one.
Well, I definitely encourage anyone who's listening to check it out. The link is going to be 5minutefriday.com/6-month memoir, with the word 6 spelled out, not the numeral 6. And I encourage you to check it out and sign up. I know it's going to be an amazing experience. And yeah, maybe I'll have to do round 2. A lot of people who finished A Place to Land said, what happened next? Where's the next one? So
yes,
maybe it's time.
Yeah, that is, like you said earlier, that's the beautiful thing about a memoir versus an autobiography. Mary Carr has written multiple beautiful memoirs, and they kind of situate in amongst themselves, and they don't cover her whole life, but they just take certain, certain aspects of it. And yeah, I think number two is definitely in the works, or needs to be in the works, Kate.
Right. Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Shawn. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I will see you in the course then.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate.
Sounds good. Thanks, Shawn.